Connie won't be here, of course.
That is.
So was she in mass this morning? I think I saw her, and I was thinking I'm going to go give her a hug and say hi.
Yeah.
And then all my day, I was just then all of a sudden I was thinking about everything.
No, she's handling it extremely well. I mean, it's crazy. I've got in the next 2 weeks, I've got 4 funerals, and they always come in bunches like this. But one of them actually is Tom Faisal. I know that's very sad.
I know.
So John Tom, he was a longtime business manager at the
favorites.
Cathedral Basilica, and I knew when I was started there as a master of ceremonies, and I know for
He was a St. Louis Saran, so the
Yeah.
St. Louis Saran pray for vocations, and they do a lot of vocations.
Right.
Oh, neat.
One of the things they do
people
is
at
a
the bottom
huge-
holding everything
One
up.
of
Yeah.
the things they do is a huge golf tournament, and then they give all that money to a fund called Hofflick, and then that's what they give to the seminarians to pay their debts.
Yeah. No, it's
And he
beautiful,
was
beautiful ministry.
very active.
He also was an acolyte. I mean, he was, very active in the parish there.
Right.
But yeah, he apparently passed away.
Bishop Rivatusa said he was going to be.
How old was he?
78. So not very old.
Right.
But I mean,
He didn't look that old.
yeah, he didn't. But I mean, yeah, we don't know what happened still. He was found on his couch.
He
So
was-
yeah. So that's on Saturday. So I'll be going to that.
Yeah, it's at 10.
Yeah. I also have Rachel's Vineyard or Project Rachel. So I'm going to have to
Oh, okay.
run over there afterwards. So Saturday's a busy day for me this week. That's all right.
Yeah, man, that just.
Fortunately, the
made me-
deacon's preaching. So I'm over it.
That just made me really sad.
Yeah, I think honestly,
And
it's
then
funny too.
So the last person to see them Wednesday, he dropped some things off at Bob Helmsing's.
Oh,
And
Well,
for
you
the
know,
golf tournament.
I just saw him last Saturday because I was over at the cathedral for mass there at 8:00. Then we went to the Planned Parenthood parade in front of Planned Parenthood, and yeah, I got conversations like, oh yeah, because he also goes every Friday usually with Father Nick Smith, and they have like a regular appointment.
Right.
And yeah, it's sad, but yeah, they're all men, which is interesting too. And I just think they're just trying not to be the Pope. I think that's what it was. They all kind of died right after the Pope passed. So
Wow.
before the conclave, I don't know, weird, but whatever. Well, again, welcome to Bob the Father. We're here in the dining room at St. Anne, discuss any topic whatsoever. So, floor is open.
Okay, so in Divine Mercy,
Yeah.
in the little book where you read about your daily life, right? There's 3 things. One of them includes a selfless prayer for somebody, just to pray for somebody else, or like a decade,
Mhm.
right? Say 10 Hail Marys, right?
Yeah.
So I think the end result is you want Jesus to be the catcher, right?
Oh,
And you're
sure.
only asking for petition, but
Yeah.
when I pray my rosary, I ask Mother Mary for petition, and if I say the Divine Mercy Rosary, do I include Saint Faustina and
Sure.
Mother Mary? And you just
Yeah, so, I mean-
alert everybody. You want
Yeah. No,
everybody go to Jesus and ask for this for me. Is that what
Well, I mean, we're
Because
told,
that's what they do.
you
They
know,
all go to Jesus.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the
Praying
more
for them.
people we have praying, whether in heaven or here on earth for a particular thing, the more opportunity there will be for it to be answered, right? Now, maybe not answered the way we want. We always want to be careful about that, right? That, when we pray for things, we shouldn't expect like genie treatment that, whatever, because God's going to answer the prayer the best way it is for us and those affected. So I, just want to throw that out there when it comes to prayer. The other thing I want to say about prayer, there's no wrong way to pray. So like one thing I do in my daily rosary is I do a litany of saints at the very end, right? So I invoke saints I have particular devotion to, maybe particular saints that my family has devotion to pray for their good, right? I also, one thing I do as well that I've started to do recently, especially as a pastor, is pray for those that disagree with me or don't like me. And I think that's a good practice because I think it gets rid of bitterness and resentment and also allows you to lay things down a little bit easier. So I think it's good to engage with that, but also in the context that you pray for, family, friends, that good stuff too. So I don't think there's any wrong way to do it, is what I would say, right? And that's one of the great things about these great devotionals that we have, right? Is that they're not obligatory, and there's really, really no wrong way to do them.
That's
right?
kind of what I was thinking.
So yeah, obviously we have some direction from the saints, so we should probably heed that. It's kind of interesting today that we celebrate Our Lady of Fatima, right? Where she really upheld, like, hey, pray the rosary. So the church doesn't go as far as like, you must pray the rosary, right? But being that's from the Blessed Mother, we probably should heed that call, right? Because that seems like that's important.
Mhm.
If the Queen of Heaven is saying that's what we get to do, then we probably should do that.
Yeah.
Right. Same with Divine Mercy. I mean, Divine Mercy is a wonderful tradition. It's a wonderful devotion of the church, and I think it's. And I think the context there is that, yeah, we want to pray for God's mercy upon all God's people, right? And even those that aren't God's people, right? So in other words, Jesus tells us very specifically that in order to be a good Christian, we should pray for our enemies.
And in there, it more or less says, the more mercy you give to your enemies, the more you will receive, right? And
That's
if
right.
you don't give any, you're not going to get any. Right, it's only what you put in.
Yeah, but I think the other thing to recognize about that too is that we're talking about teaching of Jesus, and Jesus always puts us in the context of treasure in heaven, right? So in other words, is it a moral responsibility for me to actually show mercy to an enemy? Well, I should respect the dignity of the human person. I should respect. That comes from the commandments. I should, if someone is being killed or hurt, I do have somewhat of a responsibility to do something in that instance, right? Not just to sit there and let it happen, but if that means like call the police or, defend the life. So yeah, there is sort of a moral obligation in that we have to discern, within our own circumstance and capacity of what's best. Right. So in other words, if a gunman came in right now and started trying to shoot up the place, it would not be a moral imperative for me to jump in front of that person to block the shots to come to the rest of you. Right. Now that's heroic virtue, and I would hope that I would, because hey, instant martyrdom, that's great, right? Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But it's not a moral imperative. Meaning, if I didn't, that doesn't mean that I'm automatically damned to hell.
Right.
Okay. But I also, if and when they're done, should call the police and call the ambulance to come in, right? And so again, we have to do what's best in the circumstance we find ourselves, right?
Yeah, but I think that not everything in life is life or death, and sometimes,
correct,
whether it be a coworker, a companion.
Sure.
The more mercy we give them, the easier our lives become. It's kind of like a rule.
That's absolutely true. I mean, because I think
we get caught up in
well, yeah, I mean, because I think the thing about these things, right, is that when we are offended or hurt, the natural reaction is vengeance, justice. I mean, so in other words, there's justice is a virtue, right? But we're also told that justice is God's, not ours, right?
Yeah.
So just like God, we can't give justice completely to God, and God understands that, and his response to that is mercy. We should also follow that same footprint, right? So again, we can do that better or worse, right? But ultimately, by giving mercy and forgiveness, what that does for us is it actually unburdens us, right?
It's the only way to live a joyful life.
Right,
Yeah,
because otherwise you're letting
yeah.
someone else control your actions, your emotions, which is really slavery, right? So that's really what the goal of mercy,
Doesn't
right?
mean somebody won't upset you.
Of course.
But
Right.
And it doesn't even mean
quicker
that
you let it go.
Right. And it does, let's be clear, it doesn't even mean you can't be angry, right, at being harmed or offended. It just means that you should ultimately forgive the person, right? And show that mercy to them.
Divine mercy.
Divine mercy. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, we always will be
divine intervention.
right. I mean, I think it's always good to make a distinction between the moral imperatives we're called to, which are given by the Decalogue and teaching of Christ, and what actually is fulfilling in life that leads to eternal life. So again, even that when Jesus talks about these things, he's talking about building up your treasure in heaven, right?
Yeah.
So okay, well that doesn't mean okay. So in other words, it's automatic. It basically implied you're in heaven already, right?
Right.
Now, what that actually means, treasure in heaven, well, that's kind of interesting, right? Because the goal is heaven. So who cares if I have treasure in heaven if I'm already in heaven, right? But the understanding of that is I'm building up treasure that's actually beneficial to all and others, that through generosity, I'm giving that to other people.
Oh, that's I've never looked at it that way.
Well, I think it's important. Yeah. Because I mean, when you think of it, obviously, like heaven wouldn't be a bunch of miserly people just sitting on their own merits and like hoarding them, right? That's not the goal of the Christian life, and that wouldn't be what's been done in heaven. Because heaven is a place of complete charity, right? But the kind of the rub is that it's a completely infinite charity that never runs out.
Like mercy for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's sort of like we're doing that here to kind of train ourselves for that in heaven. Because I mean, I think that's another thing too. When we look at like, oftentimes, especially like kids in the school ask like, "What's heaven like?" And it's like, well, we don't really know. I mean, we're told that the only thing we probably could say definitively is that it's a place of complete fulfillment, where none of our needs, our desires are completely met, our needs are completely met. And how that happens, that's mysterious, but also too, it's not like, it's like boredom either, right? So, because like one analogy I kind of use with the kids, like, if you go to Six Flags, right, probably have a good time for the day, right? I mean, most people do for the most part, not all the time, but most of the time you go to Six Flags, you have fun, right? It's a good day. If you were going to Six Flags every day of the year, you're probably going to get old after a while, right? And so some people would equate that to like heaven. It's like, no, that's not a really good way of looking at it, because there is no boredom in heaven. Okay, well, what is it like? Well, in some ways, we see a taste of it in the liturgy. We see a taste of it in the workings of Christians around the world, and in feeding the hungry and providing for the needs of people. Well, that sounds boring. Well, maybe it is, but that's what heaven's going to be like. And
But if heaven is perfect love,
right?
And you are loved perfectly,
right?
You'll never be bored,
right?
You could never get enough of
right.
that feeling.
Yes, but see, I think that's some of the disconnect. Is that like, well, hey, this if heaven's going to be like mass every day,
no,
I don't want to do. Well, okay.
See, our souls are going to be
right.
what's in heaven to soak up heaven. So like, while there's not levels in heaven, I think there's probably your soul, everybody's cup will be full,
right?
But your enlightenment and what you can hold within your soul is, I think, even more than others, depending on how charitable.
And I even think I think the experience you have in heaven is going to be dependent on that too. I mean, so Correct. In other words, like if I don't find a great satisfaction or joy in receiving the Eucharist, or having my sins forgiven in the confessional, or receiving these grace in the sacraments, or even going out and like feeding the hungry and clothing the naked. Giving someone, then hey, you know what? That's probably not a good sign. And so I would say that, let's say if a directee come to me with that, what I would probably advise them is do a little self-reflection and maybe ask yourself why. Now, part of that could just be trauma, right? Maybe there's hurt, there's something going on there, who knows? But ultimately, if heaven is this complete perfection of all experiences, well, that's all experiences. And so if you're not experiencing any joy or now, again, barring some psychological, emotional issue, spiritually, you probably won't look at that and say, why am I not? Right?
That would hurt. Like it would really hurt.
It might. But I think that's the other thing too. It's not meant to cause pain for the sake of pain. It's actually meant to bring healing.
No, I mean, like it would hurt not to have those feelings.
But I think there are some people that do, right? And so it's sort of like one of those questions I think is self-reflective. And I think, that's the thing in our day and age, we don't often take the time to do that. A lot of our, especially young people, they're kind of glued to screens. They kind of find satisfaction in what I can actually, the dopamine hit that I'm getting from the screen right now. Okay, well, is heaven something like that? In a way, but also if I'm not training myself here and now to live the teaching of Jesus and actually go out and be on mission, well then, heaven might be not where you're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And you may not find that fascinating, meaning, well, what's the alternative, right? But we also,
Purgatory for a long
I,
time.
Well,
I
and- well, and we
never
also-
even- I never even thought about it that
well,
way.
and we also trust in the grace of God that obviously God can move hearts and.
Maybe that person would be in purgatory.
Well, I mean,
longer
sure,
or something.
sure. I imagine that being the case, right? I mean, because
Because you can't go to heaven until you
right, you're perfected. Yeah.
until you
Yeah, and so that's, you know,
just like we don't do things here on earth until we're ready. But God doesn't ask you to do anything more than He knows you can do.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so you're not going to be asked anything more in the afterlife.
Yep. Yeah.
But
So, yeah, no, I mean, I think so when we go back to divine mercy, I think, yeah, praying for the people that we may disagree with, praying for people that who may consider us enemies, maybe we don't consider them enemies.
yeah.
I think it's a good thing to practice that mercy that God gives us, right? So that we can also do it too. But yeah, no, I think that, again, but there's no wrong way to do it. And so always being guided by the Spirit is always the best way to, I think, do it
Awesome.
too.
I think, you see that in the saints too. Like, St. Faustina was drawn to the poor soul, to the sinners and bringing all of the sinners, and other saints are drawn to other things. So, it's kind of their charism, but so we're all so different that you don't have to have all of the gifts. You
Yeah.
just have to have the gift.
Well, I think that's also
God
one of the
gave
reasons. That's one of the reasons why we see so many popes that become saints too. I mean, at least the good ones.
Yeah.
Yes, bad, but I think that's. I mean, I think Pope Leo is a great example of that. I mean, time will tell what his papacy will bring.
Mhm.
I think it's going to be a lot of time because he's relatively young. But he's a missionary pastor.
Right.
He's been a pastor of parishes in a missionary territory. That's amazing. That's kind of the person you kind of want to run the church because they've seen things from outside, just like their particular neighborhood, their city, their country. They've experienced great poverty. They've experienced great tragedy. They've experienced
Where
great
the
joy.
rubber meets the road.
Correct,
they're out
right.
in the field.
Right. And so I think that desire that the Pope has for the poor, for the outcast society that Jesus calls us to go and engage with, I think is going to be good for the church. And I think it's going to revitalize, hopefully, a lot of things here in the United States, especially, and in the Western world in general. I think the shock is still, I know for me personally, the shock is still kind of on the fact that he's an American. But I think also, too, it's funny as I'm kind of looking more into him.
Sort of.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there's a lot like the Peruvians have kind of like, he's a Peruvian Pope. It's like, well, yeah, technically he is. He's Peruvian nationality. I mean, he has a Peruvian
I figure
passport.
most of the United States Cardinals don't even know him.
Well, it was,
He's only been a
well,
Cardinal for what?
I was
less than
watching,
2 years?
yeah, I was watching Cardinal Dolan, who was doing an interview on New York, the morning show or whatever, and they were like, "Hey, so what was your impression?" I was like, he's like, "Well, actually, I didn't even know he was American." He goes like, "It was from who?" Like, who's this person?
Exactly.
And they
Because
go,
he's
you
been-
know,
yeah.
Then so he sat down with him at one of the lunches and got to know him. He's like, "Oh, I mean, so." Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different people. The Augustinians is another, organization. I mean, I think it was kind of funny that the most famous Augustinian was actually Martin Luther, but hey, we won't get into that at all. So this is maybe a act of redemption on the part of the Augustinians in that respect. But no, I mean, he's the fact he's a polyglot, the fact that he's engaged with so many different people.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
A way of it that there's a lot of people saying he's our God, right?
Well, I mean, one thing that I'm very hopeful for, and I'm wondering how this is going to play out, but so far, every liturgy he's celebrated has been in Latin, and his Latin is impeccable.
Yeah,
And as a canon lawyer, I guess you kind of have to be, but I wonder what that means for the future of the liturgy. Especially some of the restrictions that were kind of put out there prior to Pope Leo's papacy, but even maybe or even more reforms of the Novus Ordo. A lot of people don't realize this, and I know I've said this before on here, but Vatican II didn't do away with Latin.
Right.
What the documents really called for was use of vernacular to learn what was happening in the Novus Ordo, and then eventually return to Latin. So the masses that the Holy Father has been celebrating so far have really been doing that. Like the readings have been in different languages, fine. Even in the extraordinary form, there's allowance for that. But the prayers and everything have been Latin. So does that mean that maybe this is the time that we're going to return to that tradition in the liturgy? I don't know. I actually would be for that, but I mean,
Well,
I don't know.
how, as we're trying to grow the church,
mhm.
how would a young couple and their kindergarten,
Well, to answer that question, John, I mean, so I think there
or me?
No,
okay?
that's great. No. I mean, so there's a great response. There's a great question.
The
because-
kindergarten will probably be better than
Yeah,
girls.
yeah, right, okay, right, yeah.
I'm sure they will.
Well,
They can learn quicker than
I
us.
just, I'll still be able to out arm wrestle.
but I
for
think
at
that's
least
what
2
I think
years.
that's exactly the point, is that we've gotten away from teaching it because we haven't been using it, and we haven't been using it because we haven't been teaching it.
I'll be all for getting back to teaching it.
Yeah.
but Not to just switch over to Latin.
Well, no. What I'm saying is, I think that's the purpose. That would be the goal. So I would have no problem even setting up something in the school where we start teaching Latin for when and the different grade levels, first, second, third, fourth, all the way to eighth. And then by the end, you're done with eighth grade. You should be able to celebrate, listen to the mass, and understand what's going on. I don't think there's a problem with that, but we have to teach it. And I think there's going to be some people who would look at that and say, that's going back. It's going backwards. Well, that's what the church fathers envisioned. So that
I
was
got no
not,
problem with that.
was that?
I got no problem with that.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think that's one thing that we've right, wrong, or indifferent, after the implementations of Vatican II, there seems to be kind of a deviation away from some of the traditions that have been really fostered for the last thousands of years.
Yeah.
And so what has been the fruit of that? Well, we've seen diminishment in the pews. We've seen people walking away. We've seen a watered down theology and teaching of the faith. Well, maybe that's a call then to return to some of those traditions that really caused the church to thrive. And
Because it mattered more, I guess.
I mean, I think in some ways there is a
Like
loss
he
of
says,
mystery.
It's not being really taught.
Right.
I mean, I don't even know how many of the archdiocesan schools. I think St. Louis is better than Chicago, but if you take Chicago, for example, they don't even make their kids go to mass if they're at school on a holy day.
Yeah.
The priest doesn't even offer it
Well,
sometimes.
And I mean, I would even
So
say
that's-
like,
that's why our people are leaving, because they're
Yeah.
like, it's not that important.
yeah, well, I think there's a subconscious message there, right? It's like,
Right.
well, it's not that big of a deal.
It's not a big of a deal because
Oh,
we're
well,
here
all
at
right.
school and
Right,
it's a
yeah.
holiday and
Right.
we don't have to go.
Right.
We're going to a Catholic church.
And I mean, that's, to me, I guess that's kind of atrocious. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we do let the kids off of the holy days so they can go to mass, right? But it just so happens that hasn't really been happening. So maybe we need to change that tactic too. I don't
I
know.
think that's what, back in the day, that's why they did go on the
Yeah.
holy days. So you
Well, when I was growing up, we got off in the grade school for holy days. So I think the mindset there was that the parents would still bring the children to, and for the most part they did. I mean, we always went to mass holy days, and that's how it went. When we got to high school, they started actually having it. They actually would bring us in and have mass at school, because I mean, maybe they didn't trust us enough that we would actually go to mass on our own. I mean, that's not a bad approach.
Right.
Right. So, but I think also in the same context, when we talk about these things, like when I was growing up, Latin wasn't even offered in a lot of the schools. I think we only have the option between Spanish and French.
Yeah, I was never offered it. I went to public school.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get Latin there.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, we started studying Latin in the seminary, and I kind of wish we did study it earlier, because, like, once you realize that all of our languages that we have today, especially in the West, are based in Latin.
Based on it.
And so it actually gives you a better understanding of English as well as some other languages, because they all have the same roots.
Mhm.
It actually gives you also a better understanding of like syntax and things like that we haven't, that's another thing too. Like, English is really kind of built on syntax and structure, where in Latin, that's not really a thing. It's already kind of built into the way you conjugate the word. So, but it does help you understand it better, and context is really important too. So I don't know. I mean, like I say, I think that's, time will tell how that's going to play out. One thing I was doing over at my former parish was I would provide Latin classes. We did about once a month on Sundays. And I'm not opposed to that. If people are interested, we can maybe look at that.
Latin 101.
Well, and really all we were doing is just kind of looking at ecclesiastical Latin, like the Latin that we use in like the mass parts. We eventually extended the liturgy to hours. But I mean, if there's an interest, I'm happy to provide that. So maybe we'll start that over the summer. We'll see what happens after I get back from Spain. Maybe we can see what kind of interest is out there for it, and then kind of go from there. But yeah, I think that's one thing that I know a lot of my brothers are kind of looking at with the Holy Father, seeing how what he's going to do liturgically and how that's going to maybe impact the church. So we'll see.
Well, he's already going back to tradition with living in the papal apartment,
Mhm.
doing all the things in
The vestments,
What's
yeah.
the significance
yeah.
of the shoes?
The red shoes. Red for Pope is also what the cardinals wear red. Is supposed to honor the martyrs of Rome. So it's kind of going back to that, like honoring of the bloodshed that was done by the early Christians to establish Rome as Christian. So basically that's why the mozzetta
Mhm.
that the Pope wears is red. And the stole itself is red because there's a recognition of that. And the shoes is really just more of a matching thing. Right.
It's just,
Yeah.
Color coordinated.
Goes back to the tradition, yeah. And I mean, it would be there was a time too, and I don't know if it happened. I don't think it happened this time around, but all the cardinals after electing would come up and kiss the shoes of the Pope. I don't think that happened here. I think they did kiss the ring, which is cool.
Mhm.
And we'll see how. I mean, that's another thing too. I wonder how he's going to handle that. I mean, Pope Francis seemed like he was very much opposed to people showing
Yeah,
that
he didn't
honor.
Yeah, he
shoes.
didn't like that.
I haven't really seen much anyone with Pope Leo, but then again, he hasn't really had too many audiences or anything yet. So I don't know. We'll see. There's actually a proper way and a wrong way of doing it. So when you apparently, and this is supposed to be with bishops too, you would genuflect on your left knee, not your right, because right's always designated for God. Left is towards royalty. You would put your left hand out, palm down. They would put their hand on top, and that's how you would kiss the ring.
Hmm.
So that's traditionally how that would be done.
I guess it depends on your person.
You mean like?
Well, there's a certain way you address an archbishop as well, but it depends on how, some of them are not, they're a little more
Yeah.
lenient towards the public.
Yeah, I mean, there's like, so the title for bishop is Most Reverend or His Excellency,
Right.
Or Your Excellency, or Your Grace. That's another one too. A cardinal you would call Your Eminence, and that's kind of the big difference between those two. And of course, Your Holiness would be for the Holy Father. So, yeah, there's different ways to address it. More formal. I remember when I was being confirmed. I was told like, oh, well, the Archbishop would call him His Eminence. Well, my parents told me this, but they grew up with cardinals that were in St. Louis, and I didn't know the difference. So when I saw Archbishop Regali, I said, "Oh, Your Eminence," and he said, "Oh," he was kind of taken aback, like, "Well, maybe not yet." And it's like, "Oh, it's like what
so
I
you
do."
have a premonition.
Well, I guess I don't know. I think it was an honest mistake, but I mean, he was.
But he was eventually.
He was. I mean,
is
after he
the
left St. Louis,
next
he became the
eminence.
Archbishop of Philadelphia. He was made a cardinal by, I guess it
John
was still
Paul
John
II.
Paul II. Yeah. So then, of course, Cardinal Burke went off and became the Signatura. So he became a cardinal. Poor Archbishop Carlson retired, so I guess he can have the opportunity. So yeah, I don't know. But I didn't know the difference, and so I just called him His Eminence, and he was actually, oh. So then I realized later, I was looking it up. I was like, oh, I should have called him His Excellency. Oh well, whatever. Then the next time I saw him, he was a cardinal, so it was fine. Yeah.
Sorry. First time I met Archbishop Burke, I had just got my job, barely started, and I was so nervous to, what do I say? What do I
Yeah.
say? So I called him I used the correct term,
Yeah.
Your Excellency, but I said Archbishop Regali. He shook my hand. He said, "It's Archbishop Burke, but that's okay."
It's hard to get used to that. Like, I even like,
okay,
yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm gonna be fired before
well,
I'm hired.
well, I remember I remember when Archbishop Rosansky came, it took a little time to get used to Robert and Mitchell.
Mhm.
But even, I have found myself, I don't know why this is, but I found myself easier switching between Francis and Leo. I don't know why. I haven't messed it up yet. So see what happens. But yeah, I don't know. I just found that maybe it's because he's an American. Maybe that's, I don't know.
No.
It's interesting. I have not really found myself having to like, stumble through that at all yet. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm sure other guys maybe have. I don't know. But these changes, it's interesting because, you're just got to get used to it.
Right.
A question for you.
Yeah.
You kind of answered part of it earlier when you said to die a martyr.
Mm.
That's like a really good thing. So let's say now you're in Washington State with that
The confessional
thing, right? And so you have this opportunity to go to jail, if so be. So does something like that really, at least personally, get you fired up and say, yeah, let's bring it on. Let's.
So
yeah.
you know what he's talking
Okay,
about?
maybe to get some clarity. So for those watching, there was a state law recently passed in the state of Washington that requires clergy. I don't think he gets as specific as priests, but it's more like faith leaders or whatever.
It's gotta be if it's confessional.
I don't know, because there are certain levels of confession that other denominations have. Actually, Lutherans actually have confession, technically, but it's not real. I mean, we'll get that. That's a whole different thing.
Wasn't
But
That's a truth, faith, truth, and friend.
yeah. Well, so Washington State passed this law that required those who are, it's brought to confidence about certain things, especially when it deals with like any violation of law, like murder, theft, even like things like sexual abuse, that kind of stuff, that the confessor would have the obligation to report that to the authorities. In other words, break the seal of confession. This is the first time really anywhere that has actually been passed. I don't know if it's been ratified.
Is
I
it
don't know
passed
yet.
or is it just
I don't know. I thought it was passed, but I could be wrong. But definitely first time has been brought to the United States anyway, to some kind of legislative, action. So that also obviously puts priests, bishops in a bind, because as if someone hears confession, you hear certain things all the time that is not necessarily lawful. And of course, there's you try to give counsel to help that person to make a determination what they should do, or you ask them to come talk to you outside the confessional. But everyone has a different way they do that. But to break the seal would not only violate, excommunicate the person, but also puts my soul in mortal sin. So even the circumstance would be such that I would still commit a mortal sin if I were to do that, right? So I think my approach, and I imagine most priests' approach, would be, okay. Now, I think there's also some practical things that need to be brought into play, like how do you enforce that?
Right.
So in other words, right, how would you know? Like, so
how would you know they confessed it if I don't report
right.
it?
Yeah. So like if Greg comes in the confessional and says, well, let's father of sin, it's been out weeks since my last confession. I murdered 3 people and stole 3 BMWs. Well, hey, Greg, that's not great. I don't know what the circumstances are there, but God still loves you. He wants the best things for you, forgives you. But, you maybe you should consider turning yourself in if you haven't already, or talk to the police, or at least find a lawyer, something like that. And if you want to talk to me outside the confessional, that'd be a good thing to do. So now in that scenario, let's say Greg takes my advice, says, I really probably should go turn myself in. That's a good idea. And he does. And maybe in the course of the investigation, the police come to me and says, did Greg come to you and confess to you? Here's my honest response. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know. Right.
And you don't remember.
And that's, in some ways, that's also the advantage why the church also has anonymous confession as well as face-to-face. And it gives the penitent the option. But either way, I still wouldn't know. Maybe a great.
It's hard for a non-Catholic to understand.
Well, yeah, I'm sure. I think it is too. But I mean, a good example of that was someone this past weekend came to me and said, "Oh, Father, I got that book." And I was like, "Great. What are you talking about? I don't know what book." oh, well, you told me I should get this book. I said, okay, what was, I was like, oh, well, it was in the confession. I'm like, oh, all right, okay. If you said I said it, fine. I don't know. Honestly, couldn't tell you. Gun to my head. Do you recommend this book? Is it possible? Sure. He said I did it for sure. I have no idea. Right?
I get that. I get
So it's the enforcement of that, I think, is going to be incredibly difficult.
that.
Because what you'd have to show is that I for sure knew that the person was there, and I heard it and I did it, and I can't validate that. So if you're going to put me in prison for that, well then, okay, you know. Now you would think, hopefully, by doing that, there would be such an uproar by the faithful
Right.
that there would be some kind of, or just people in general that are seeking justice,
Right.
and like just people of reason would be like, that's ridiculous. No, let's put a referendum on the ballot and let's do something here.
Yeah, it's a.
I mean,
violation of
maybe that's
I
putting-
felt bad about a lot of
Well,
things.
maybe that's putting too much hope in people. I don't know, but you know, I think there's going to be some challenges to that if it hasn't already been. And so, but if you're asking me what I would do in that circumstance, I guess I'm going to prison.
We will bake you a cake
Thank you.
without any files in it or anything.
Right, of
No
course. Yes, that
files.
would be wrong. Yes, of course. Right. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I hope it doesn't come to that, but also I think most priests would be in the circumstance where they'd be like, yeah, fine, whatever.
You wouldn't lose any sleep.
Nope. I'd rather go to prison than put my mortal
And
soul
go
in
to
danger.
hell,
Right.
yeah. I'd rather go to prison than hell.
Right.
Prison
Or
is
even-
a lifetime.
Right. Or even
Or,
lose
You know,
because here's the other thing too. I can
Forever.
still minister in prison.
right, but
Yeah,
hell is hell.
Yeah.
Hell is forever.
Right.
Prison is just a little bit of a stay.
I can still hear confessions and bring the Eucharist and anoint people in prison. So fine. Cool.
you'd have a lot of,
Yeah,
work
maybe.
on your hands.
Maybe. But hey, I'd rather have more
Right.
work than no work. So fine. You know.
Today's reading,
Yeah.
and it said after the big, and I'm just paraphrasing because I'm horrible. Please forgive me. But there's the big that happened with Stephen, and then everybody took as because there was a lot of crucifying.
Was that
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the first reading, right?
and they weren't called Christians yet.
Right.
Crucifying, right, and so everybody bolted and they went to Antioch and they went. What? I don't know who Stephen is. And So
Stephen,
explain
yeah,
Stephen.
no, good.
what
Stephen.
happened? What happened?
Oh, yeah. Okay, Stephen was one of, okay, so after, as a matter of fact, tomorrow we're going to hear about St. Matthias, very early in Acts of the Apostles, that the apostles decide to replace Judas.
Yeah.
And so they do that by,
Okay.
well, they cast lots, but they first have these candidates, right? So it'll probably be more about that in my homily tomorrow, so I don't want to ruin all for you. But there is a action that happens there where they pick somebody to take their place. So what that shows early on is that there actually is this apostolic succession, right? So you have certain people that would say, well, after the apostles died, the priesthood died too. It was just, for that time, it's like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But we see, but that's even biblical. You go to scripture, you see that there's a laying on of hands of these people, prayer being done over them that changes them in a way that does certain things. So
Mhm.
Matthias is one of those. Another one of those, there were some problems going on within Jerusalem of particular Gentile widows and orphans were being neglected. So the apostles decide, well, we should probably find some men of reputable men that should take these, do these ministries and go out and bring food to these people and bring, especially the Eucharist to them that can't make it to Mass, whatever else. And they call them deacons. right? So there are 7 of these deacons that were ordained by the apostles to do this ministry, right? And that also is reflected in the fact that the apostles were ordained deacons and the fact that Jesus washed their feet. And that was kind of an action that we heard on Holy Thursday. So Stephen was one of those. And actually, Stephen became the very first, he's called the proto-martyr because he was the first martyr after the resurrection of Jesus. So when he was a deacon, he was also spreading the word, right?
Mhm.
That's what deacon does. And he was kind of persecuted for it by the officials. They brought him into the court. They were like, stop doing this, blah, blah. This Jesus guy, you should stop talking about him. And he's like, well, no.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting, though, is that we're told in Scripture that he was stoned to death, and it was being oversaw by this guy named Saul of Tarsus. And people were throwing their cloaks at his feet because he was condoning it. So Paul was kind of the one that initiated the death of Stephen, who was the first martyr and a deacon of the church. And then shortly afterwards, well, maybe a year, Saul converts and becomes Paul. So that's who Stephen is. Stephen is a deacon, the first
Okay.
martyr of the church after the resurrection of Jesus.
Oh.
That's why the church is saying Stephen the proto-martyr.
Correct.
It's not, it's closed now.
No, it's not.
It's not?
No, it's actually the main church. It got subsumed to others.
Oh, okay.
So there were 7. There was Stephen, Nicanor, who are the other ones? They're all actually the apostles. So they actually have names of the guys there too. That was funny because that was actually the reading that we used at our deacon ordination. Because we had 7 of us, and one was named Stephen.
Fitting.
Yeah, it was very fitting.
Very fitting.
So yeah, we each took one as our patron. So it was kind of nice. Yeah.
Who was yours?
I think it was Nicanor. That was close to Mark. It was like Mark, Nicanor. Yeah, close enough. I'll make it work. Yeah. Good.
Cool.
Any other questions?
I don't think so.
All right. Great. Well, thanks for everybody. We will see you next week for another Father.
Cool.
Hi, everyone. See you later.